What if the conflict between demons and angels isn't merely a myth? Rather, it's historical evidence concealed in the incorrect Bible? Something ancient that has long been concealed beneath layers of custom, mystery, and misinterpretation is at the core of this question. Stories of celestial beings engaged in combat, fighting for humanity's survival, have been taught to us for centuries. However, what if that conflict is much more than a story told in religious writings? What if it's a real, physical conflict that predates both the creation of man and the passage of time? We are caught up in a web of chaos and confusion in the modern world. Distractions appear to cloud our spiritual vision, and forces beyond our complete comprehension frequently distort our perception of right and wrong. When the distinctions between light and dark are hazy and we aren't sure what to believe, we are left to wonder, what is the real reason for this celestial conflict? Could the ancient texts, which are overlooked by the prevailing narratives we follow today, hold the secret to comprehending the invisible forces at work around us? The Ethiopian Bible, an unopened scroll with mysteries the world isn't yet prepared to accept, contains this secret. We come across a revelation in these ancient texts that is so profound that it upends our preconceived notions about angels, demons, and the conflict that has been going on for much longer than humanity itself. However, there is still more to discover, something that challenges the fundamentals of our comprehension. Jesus the Black, the divine face, a person who has been obscured, forgotten, or misrepresented. The battle, which has been meticulously hidden and kept out of the public eye to keep humanity from realizing the conflict's true nature, includes this as well. It wasn't always quiet in heaven. It was more than just the location of the timeless, harmony and light that we now associate with it. No, the very foundations of the divine realm were rocked by rebellion once. When angels fell from grace and demons were expelled from heaven itself, Lucifer and his armies fought the Almighty. The effects of that war are still felt today, influencing every conflict, spiritual struggle, and dark moment we encounter. Make sure to turn on the bell and subscribe to the Ethiopian Bible before we delve further into this secret conflict between the divine and the demonic, for the truth you are about to discover has been concealed for centuries. And to get you thinking, do you think angels still exist among us? Or have they abandoned humanity? Tell me in the comments. There was a world of unadulterated light and divine harmony before time, as we know it started and before the earth was, even created. In the past, heaven was a place of unwavering tranquility where the Creator and his angels lived in perfect harmony. But there was a dark stirring even in paradise. The brightest of all the angels, Lucifer, started to sense a whisper that nourished on ambition and pride. What was once selfless and pure became something else. A yearning for authority and control over the very forces that had previously submitted to him started to develop. Lucifer asked himself in his heart, "Why should I serve? Why shouldn't I be in charge?" The rebellion started at this point. A realm of harmony and peace was about to be ripped apart. Lucifer's pride was now a raging fire rather than a silent seed. He assembled a multitude of angels around him who had once been obedient and fervently loved the Creator, but were now entangled in a web of disobedience and conceit. Blinded by the same pride that had once engulfed their leader, they followed him. These were incredibly powerful and beautiful angels, creatures who had once reveled in the splendor of creation, but were now tainted by a sense of entitlement. The uprising was violent and quick. Darkness abruptly replaced the dazzling splendor of heaven, the place where light itself glistened with divine splendor. No creature had ever dared to challenge the Creator in the way that Lucifer and his fallen angels did. A battle broke out between light and darkness, between loyalty and treachery, and the very foundations of heaven trembled. The very fabric of existence might have been ripped apart by the collision of celestial forces. However, Lucifer and his Disobedient crew were thrown out of the divine realm and into the abyss by the Creator, who used his unwavering power to do so. However, the tale doesn't stop there. The Ethiopian Bible's ancient book of Enoch provides us with details that the Western canon has long concealed. This holy book gives us a glimpse of what happened after the rebellion, showing us the anguish and suffering of the fallen angels. From the beginning, these were not cold-hearted demons. No, the Creator himself had once selected them as graceful, beautiful beings, and now they were only shadowed shadows of who they used to be. The angels who fell did not rise voluntarily in defiance. Rather, they were motivated by an insatiable desire to transcend their assigned role and be more than they were. It was impossible to imagine the emotional anguish that followed their fall. Remorse, grief, and the knowledge that they would never be able to regain the glory they had experienced were all present. They had become something else, something broken and twisted as a result of their rebellion. Hatred and a fierce desire to corrupt the very creation they had once defended supplanted the love they had once had for the Creator. Once a place of praise and joy, the heavens were now plagued by heavenly grief. Picture the Creator standing among the ruins of his shattered creation, grieving for the people he used to call his own. He was grieving over what he had voluntarily chosen as well as what he had lost. Once bathed in his light, his most beautiful, angels now cursed the light that had made them alive. Then came the fallen angels' fury. Their exile was a fierce outrage for them rather than a meek acceptance of their lot in life. They were incensed at the Creator himself as well as at their loss. How was he able to expel them from heaven? How could he harm them like this? He was the enemy in their eyes. Therefore, they vowed to destroy everything he loved, to bring chaos and suffering to his creation, and to bring the world he had created to ruin. The cosmic conflict between good and evil, which would transcend worlds, touch human hearts, and influence the path of history, began with the fall of Lucifer and his angels. The war that started in heaven has never really ended, and the embers of their rebellion are still burning in the demons' hearts today. It has just been fought with different faces, in different realms, and in different forms. The world is still, shaped by the wrath of the once bright angels who disobeyed their Creator, but they are now lost in darkness. When you're feeling the weight of your personal troubles in the stillness of the night, keep in mind that the conflict between light and dark started long before you were even born. When angels decided to reject the Creator, it all started in the heavens, and they are still fighting for your soul in unseen places. Some of the angels decided not to stay in the eternal darkness of their exile after the rebellion in heaven was put down and they were thrown into the abyss. The Watchers, a small group of angels, made a choice that would change the path of history forever. In the past, the Watchers, also known as Grigori, had served as humanity's protectors, entrusted with directing and keeping watch over the world. However, their divine role started to change over time. The beauty of the human race and the world below drew the attention of the Watchers. They perceived in people a delicate, imperfect, yet lovely quality, and their downfall was caused by this very attraction. The Watchers formed a blood pact, a bond that was cemented in the shadowy temptations of earth rather than in the divine light of heaven. They left their positions as heavenly guardians and descended from the heavens to assume human form. They took human wives, which was against the laws of heaven, because their desires brought them to the daughters of men. The Nephilim were a species of child that the world had never seen before, born of the union of divine beings and human women. The Nephilim were enormous beings who loomed over humanity with unimaginable beauty and strength. They were extremely powerful beings, but they had a price for that power. Their very existence was a perversion of the natural order and an abomination. Human and angelic children were born corrupted and cursed. The angels' disobedience manifested itself in their presence on earth, and their effects on creation were catastrophic. The Nephilim were violent, cruel, and motivated by an unquenchable desire for power. They did not live in peace. Their very presence started to distort creation, causing anarchy and corruption to spread throughout the nation. Despite their union with humanity, the Watchers continued to rebel. The angels started teaching their human wives and, consequently, humanity, secret knowledge that was never intended to be shared as they interacted with men's daughters. The craft of war, the sinister abilities of witchcraft, the alluring mysteries of beauty and lust, and the heavenly secrets of astrology were among the forbidden arts they taught. Humanity now possessed the very knowledge that had previously only been available to divine beings, and with it came destruction. The more humans learnt to fight, the more destructive war became, as both men and women turned to the dark arts to control their surroundings. Witchcraft grew rapidly. As deceit and manipulation tainted the sacredness of relationships, seduction and lust turned into instruments of power. Once a place of divine peace and order, the heavens now watched as the earth continued to descend into anarchy. In addition to corrupting themselves, the Watchers had jeopardized the very foundation of creation in their self-centered quest for forbidden knowledge and mortal pleasure. One man, however, defied the trend in the middle of this collapse. The only voice of caution to a world that had turned away from its divine foundations was that of Enoch, a good man who walked with God. Enoch was aware that humanity was in danger of extinction and that it was impossible to overlook the corruption that had been bred by the Nephilim's blood. He witnessed the Watchers' actions tearing the earth and the heavens apart, and he took the duty of conveying a message with him. However, nobody wanted to hear the message. Enoch's job as a prophet was to deliver the Creator's warnings to the very creatures that were once divine. He had witnessed the impending devastation and the purification that would remove the impurities brought about by the Watchers. He was aware, though, that his words would be ignored. His people no longer believed in the divine order because they had sunk so far into sin. Lost in their quest for power and knowledge, they had grown insensitive to the warnings. There was a lot of conflict in Enoch's moral and emotional quandary. Being a man of God, he was aware of the fallout from the rebellion, including the destruction it had caused to the natural world and the suffering it had inflicted on the hearts of the righteous. However, he also recognized the attraction of forbidden knowledge because he was a father and understood people's hearts. The temptation to use something that was not intended for mortal hands was strong, as was the desire for power. He was aware that the angels who had come to earth were not fundamentally bad, but rather had been misguided by desires that impaired judgment. Enoch experienced a profound conflict in his heart between his compassion for the fallen and the divine, laws he had vowed to obey. In addition to prophecy, Enoch's journey involved pleading and reaching out to a world that was on the verge of complete collapse. He became the bearer of a message that would remain unrecognized until it was too late. The Watchers were unable to recognize the destruction they were causing to the world because they were too preoccupied with their own desires. However, Enoch did, and his words were the last hope for a world that had abandoned its Creator. Even though he knew the floodgates of judgment were about to open, Enoch stood at the edge of the abyss, calling out for redemption as humanity continued its descent into chaos, and the Watchers watched from the shadows of their corruption. It was the height of the conflict between divine will and human desire. The Watchers' rebellion was the downfall of humanity, not merely a fall from heaven. Even though they went unheard, Enoch's warnings were the final sounds of a voice attempting to remind everyone of what they had lost and what they would soon lose. Jesus is not at all like the placid, submissive character that is frequently portrayed in Western art and theology in the pages of the Ethiopian Bible. Rather, he is shown to be a warrior king, a divine victor who is on a quest to destroy the evil structures that had taken over the world. In addition to being a sharp contrast to the calm, peaceful image that has been shaped for centuries, this portrayal of Christ as a relentless, fiery force also represents a reclamation of his actual nature, which is firmly anchored in the black identity of Africa, especially Ethiopia. According to Ethiopian tradition, Jesus preached more than just peace and love. As a warrior, he was aware of the ongoing struggle against the forces that aimed to wipe out humanity and in the invisible worlds. He was preparing for a war beyond human understanding from the time he went into the wilderness to fast for 40 days and 40 nights. Jesus faced the legions of darkness, the demonic forces that had been permitted to roam the earth in the wilderness, which was more than just a place for introspection and prayer. His determination remained unwavering despite temptation. Every answer to Satan's offers and taunts was a calculated counterattack in the spiritual battle that he knew would end with his mission to restore creation. He fought with the Word of God. According to the Ethiopian Bible, this conflict was about restoring the divine order that had been distorted by Lucifer's disobedience and the Watcher's downfall, not just about saving humanity. Jesus' mission was to wage a divine war against the demonic principalities and powers that had taken root in every aspect of creation, not only against sin. His spiritual struggles were not one-off events. Rather, they were reflections of a larger cosmic struggle that had been going on for a long time before he was born. Jesus' actions during his ministry further establish his image as a warrior. He was not afraid to take on evil directly. He expelled the darkness from people and communities by casting out demons with authority and fire in his eyes. His interactions with the demonic were not mild, as though he were merely attempting to promote harmony. He approached each encounter with the knowledge that he was not only a healer, but also a conqueror of darkness, because he understood the seriousness of the battle he was involved in. Demons could scream in fear just by seeing him in a room because they knew he was the one who had come to bind them and take away their power. We once more witnessed the manifestation of Jesus' warrior spirit in the Garden of Gethsemane, just before his crucifixion. Jesus prayed so fervently that his perspiration turned into drops of blood while his disciples slept, oblivious to the full significance of what was transpiring. This was not a man running away in terror. Rather, it was the king getting ready for the decisive conflict, aware of the price, but unwavering in his mission. His prayer, "Father, not my will, but yours be done," was one of focused determination, rather than passive submission. In addition to dying, he was getting ready to finally vanquish the forces of sin and death. There was no turning back when he was taken into custody and taken to his crucifixion. The Ethiopian Bible depicts Jesus as a warrior who understood the power he possessed, in contrast to Western theology's portrayal of him as a gentle, suffering Messiah. He would have been justified in summoning legions of angels to defend himself. But because he recognized the greater struggle, he decided to die on the cross. The cross was the turning point, the point at which the enemy would be vanquished by his sacrifice, rather than the conclusion of the conflict. His death on the highway cross signified the restoration of God's kingdom and the dismantling of the forces of evil, not a sign of defeat. The ultimate triumph was his resurrection, a triumph that would rock the worlds of the living and the dead. There is a noticeable difference between the Ethiopian and Western representations of Jesus. Christ has frequently been depicted in the West as a passive, mild, and meek person, a lamb offered as a sacrifice without opposition. However, Jesus is viewed in Ethiopia as a valiant warrior who never gave up against the forces of evil. Because his story is intricately linked to the fight for justice, truth, and liberation that has reverberated throughout African history, his black identity is crucial to this portrayal. In addition to his earthly ancestry, Jesus was, and remains, a liberator for the oppressed, a force of divine power that opposes all systems of cruelty, injustice, and darkness. He was more than just a world savior. According to the Ethiopian Bible, Jesus believes that the war is still going on. He continued to fight the demonic forces after he died on the cross. It persists in believers' hearts and in the constant spiritual conflict that those who follow him experience. Every Christian is called to fight this ongoing battle, which is not merely a historical event. Those who fight against the forces that seek to enslave and destroy, as well as the darkness in their own lives, can still possess the power that Jesus displayed on the cross. As the divine warrior king who will return one day to finally and totally defeat all evil, Jesus continues to lead his followers in the war he started. According to Ethiopian tradition, Jesus is not only the Lamb of God who atones for the sins of the world, but also the Lion of Judah, the powerful warrior who will ultimately triumph over all the forces of evil. His sword is out, poised to slay everything that stands in the way of his kingdom, and his eyes are like fire, blazing with the ferocity of divine justice. This is the real Jesus, the fire-eyed warrior who comes not only to save, but also to rule as king and warrior over a world long ensnared in the clutches of evil. One of the oldest and most mysterious civilizations in the world, Ethiopia has preserved sacred knowledge that has been kept secret from the outside world for many years. The cradle of divine mysteries, this land is frequently ignored in popular religious narratives. It contains the secrets of ancient truths that have been suppressed, distorted, or forgotten by empires over the ages. Ethiopia is a spiritual stronghold, free from the influence of Rome and the Western powers that aimed to change and dominate the development of Christian doctrine. It is more than just a country. The abundance of old scrolls, artifacts, and teachings that have been steadfastly preserved within its boundaries provide a glimpse into the actual, unvarnished character of the divine conflict that has influenced the path of human history. The Ark of the Covenant, a hallowed vessel that is said to contain the very presence of God, is one of the most profound and revered representations of Ethiopia's divine guardianship. This sacred artifact has been preserved in the Church of St. Mary of Zion in Axum, Ethiopia, for centuries. According to Ethiopian tradition, the Ark was brought back to Ethiopia by the Queen of Sheba during her meeting with King Solomon, permanently tying Ethiopia's destiny to the divine. This link is more than merely a historical anecdote. It is a living example of Ethiopia's function as the custodian of sacred knowledge and as the nation that, like the burning bush that called to Moses, guards the fire of God's presence. It is an unquenchable fire that has been preserved from the effects of time and outside intervention by Ethiopian generations. Ethiopia's close ties to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which has been the custodian of an enormous collection of old biblical writings, further reflect the country's spiritual significance. Some of these texts, such as the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Enoch, and Verse Maccabean, are not found in the Western canon. A deeper, more nuanced understanding of the biblical story is provided by these books, which unveil elements of creation, the celestial rebellion, and the fallen angels that have been hidden in other traditions. These texts, which are part of the Ethiopian Bible, offer insights into the real cosmic struggle that has been going on since the beginning of time, and present a history that is very different from the Western narrative. The revered preservation of these ancient texts, frequently in the form of elaborately illustrated manuscripts, is a testament to the spiritual devotion of Ethiopian scribes and monks who devoted their lives to preserving these holy texts. Ethiopia's sacred legacy is embodied by individuals such as Emperor Haile Selassie. Ethiopia's final emperor, Haile Selassie, is admired for his leadership skills, as well as his deep spiritual ties to the country's religious and cultural past. His rule carried on Ethiopia's long-standing tradition of standing up for the true faith by attempting to keep the nation safe from outside influences while preserving its strong ties to its religious past. As a messianic figure, Haile Selassie is frequently linked to the Rastafarian movement. However, his influence extends beyond this, reflecting a more comprehensive view of Ethiopia as the everlasting defender of divine truth, with origins dating back to the days of Solomon and Sheba. The emperor was a spiritual leader who recognized the gravity of Ethiopia's divine duty, as evidenced by his support of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, his efforts to protect the country's holy artifacts, and his support for African unification. Another important part of Ethiopia's spiritual heritage is the monks of Aksum. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church's ancient texts and traditions have been preserved for centuries by these monks, who live in Ethiopia's highlands and monasteries, sometimes in isolation from the outside world. The great care with which they have preserved Ethiopia's Christian manuscripts and scrolls is a testament to their devotion to their sacred duty. Numerous of these writings are thought to hold the key to the divine conflict between angels and demons, as well as the secrets of humanity's origins and ultimate destiny. These monks, who frequently live in austere surroundings, see their work as a sacred mission to maintain the age-old flame of divine knowledge rather than merely a religious obligation. Additionally, Ethiopia's spiritual stronghold serves as a haven from the political and religious scheming that has influenced a large portion of Christian history. Ethiopia maintained its own distinct theological traditions and was largely unaffected by the Roman Empire's attempts to standardize Christian doctrine through the Nicene Creed and other decrees. The Ethiopian Church continued to practice an older branch of Christianity that was more in line with the ideas of the early Church Fathers, rejecting the tenets and doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. Ethiopia is a stronghold against the external influences that are changing Christianity in this way. It serves as a living archive of the timeless truths that have been disregarded or repressed by strong empires over the ages. In a world where darkness frequently reigns, Ethiopia has been able to shine as a beacon of divine light thanks to its spiritual autonomy and the nation's unshakable faith. The essence of ancient, unadulterated truth, the truth that has been concealed from the general public for centuries, is what Ethiopia protects, not just the Ark of the Covenant. The fact that Ethiopia has managed to preserve these holy writings is evidence of its position as the custodian of divine wisdom, a place where the flame of God's presence never goes out. This larger narrative, which includes the Ark, the scrolls, and the monks of Aksum, depicts the real conflict between divine and demonic forces, as well as the steadfast determination of a people selected to uphold the truth despite all obstacles. Ethiopians believe that the hidden fire of divine knowledge is a living force that guides those who are trying to solve the real mysteries of the spiritual world. It is not merely a relic from the past. As the defender of these holy gems, Ethiopia is a living example of the tenacity of divine truth, a spiritual stronghold that has withstood centuries of deception and evil. The age-old conflict between angels and demons is not a myth from the past. It is still relevant today and is reflected in the devil's devious but subtle methods of influencing the world. With its unvarnished perspective on spiritual warfare, the Ethiopian Bible offers a prism through which we can perceive the full scope of these evil forces at work in the contemporary world. Today's demons don't brandish swords or shoot fire from the sky. Rather, they contaminate the very culture that determines our lives, control the media, and infiltrate human systems. The battle is now waged in people's hearts and minds rather than in the sky. Demons work in the background, influencing everything from our deepest desires to how we perceive the world. Demons don't have to be hideous monsters to operate in the modern world. Their strategies are much more nuanced and extensive. They function via the political, media, and international economic structures that control society. Demons permeate every aspect of contemporary culture in an era where entertainment and technology rule the day. There has never been a stronger temptation to fit in, to idolize, and to pursue immediate satisfaction. Hollywood frequently serves as a haven for spiritual deception because of its glitzy appeal and enticing stories. Here, false idols are built for public worship, and warped versions of reality are marketed as fact. The constant onslaught of media, messages, commercials, films, social media, creates the appearance of success and happiness, which only serves to increase the sense of emptiness inside. Through these means, demons influence people to believe that their value is determined by their possessions or appearance, which in turn fuels confusion, desire, and the unrelenting pursuit of material wealth. Demons can also have an impact on political systems. We have witnessed the emergence of dishonest leaders throughout history who use their position of authority for their own benefit, causing war, division, and anarchy in their countries. These days, politicians are frequently used as puppets in a larger spiritual conflict, controlled by evil forces to achieve goals that support power, greed, and the repression of the truth. Since decisions made by world leaders can either be tainted by deceit and manipulation or align with justice and truth, the political landscape is in many ways a mirror of the conflict between good and evil in the heavens. In order to keep humanity divided and diverted from the actual spiritual conflict at hand, demons use these tainted systems to sow discord and division among nations, fostering distrust and hatred. On a more intimate level, demon influence takes on more subtle forms, such as mental suffering, depression, confusion, and temptation. The Ethiopian Bible urges people to protect their hearts and minds from the enemy's attacks and warns of the perils of spiritual blindness. Despite the fact that temptation to sin can take many different forms, it always results in a greater distance from the Creator. Demons gradually erode a person's sense of self through these temptations, replacing it with a desire for transient pleasures, insecurity, and hopelessness. With millions of people worldwide suffering from depression, anxiety, and hopelessness, the pervasiveness of these forces is especially noticeable in the current mental health crises. The devilish forces that manipulate minds and push them farther into darkness are responsible for the overwhelming flood of negative emotions and the omnipresent sense of confusion and loss. Demons also encourage violence and war as a strategy. According to the Ethiopian Bible, entire civilizations were destroyed as a result of the Nephilims and the fallen angels' corrupt influence. Even though swords aren't used in the fight today, the results are still disastrous. Demonic forces that thrive on division, hatred, and the desire for power frequently fuel international conflicts, civil unrest, and wars between nations. Power is only one aspect of the demonic agenda. Destruction is another. Humanity is kept in cycles of violence and terror by the chaos and carnage that come with war, which strengthens the dark's hold over the world. Another tactic used by demons to maintain control over humanity is the avarice that permeates contemporary society. Because capitalism emphasizes accumulating wealth and resources, it can lead to spiritual corruption. The Ethiopian Bible urges believers to pursue the real treasures of heaven rather than the transient comforts of this world, cautioning against the perils of materialism and the idols of the heart. However, in today's world, pursuing wealth frequently causes people to lose sight of the bigger spiritual realities. People are taught that their worth is correlated with what they possess or can obtain, which promotes a culture of rivalry, comparison, and unrelenting ambition. Demons profit from the emptiness and dissatisfaction that result from this unquenchable desire for more. The idea that material wealth and prestige are the keys to happiness and fulfillment enslaves the human soul, which is constantly searching for meaning and purpose. The Ethiopian Bible's prophetic writings serve as a sobering reminder of the global deception that is already taking place right in front of our eyes. The coming days, when the world will be tricked by false teachings, corrupt systems, and false prophets, are specifically mentioned in the Book of Enoch. These predictions are not merely myths from antiquity. They are cautions that still hold. True today because of how readily society can be swayed by those who wish to mislead it. With its vivid depiction of the spiritual conflicts between angels and demons, the Ethiopian Bible equips us with the knowledge and skills necessary to spot these lies and withstand the temptation of false promises. From the lies propagated by entertainment and culture to the corruption in our political systems, the spiritual war is not far away. It is being waged now, everywhere in the world. Demons actively participate in forming human history rather than merely observing it passively. They are using more sophisticated, and widespread tactics now than they have in the past. The enemy is constantly trying to divert our attention from the truth through everything from the media we consume to the leaders we follow, the temptations we encounter, and the emotional upheaval we go through. The fight is taking place in our everyday lives, not just in the heavens. And the only way we can hope to remain strong in this continuous spiritual conflict is by identifying these demonic strategies and returning to the divine wisdom found in the Ethiopian Bible. Apocalyptic. Prophecies that foretell an extraordinary divine intervention, a time when the conflict between light and darkness will no longer be concealed in the spiritual realms, but will instead take place in the physical world, can be found in the pages of the Ethiopian Bible, which maintains an unwavering connection to ancient wisdom. The return of the righteous angels is predicted in these writings, but not as far-off mythological characters, but rather as strong forces prepared to take on the demonic systems that have afflicted humanity for ages. The time for the righteous to rise has come, and the once quiet heavens are now stirring. The Ethiopian scriptures foretell a great awakening, a moment when divine entities that have long been hidden from the world will reappear to bring justice, retrieve the lost, and reestablish the equilibrium that was upset by Lucifer's rebellion. The restoration of power, truth, and spiritual authority to those who have long been marginalized and silenced is the focus of this prophecy, which goes beyond simply predicting the end of the world. The appearance of black saints, those chosen by the Creator for this pivotal time in history, is at the heart of this prophecy. In addition to being saints in the conventional sense, these individuals are leaders and warriors who have been given the spiritual strength to lead humanity through the last conflict. Because of its strong ties to African heritage, the Ethiopian Bible highlights that these saints have their roots in Africa, a continent that has long been associated with the divine, from the time of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba to Ethiopia's significant role in the narrative of salvation. According to this prophecy, the emergence of black saints is a reclamation of divine purpose rather than merely a political statement. A mission to restore justice and righteousness will be carried out by these saints, many of whom have been obscured by history. They will break the bonds of oppression and guide the world back to its spiritual foundations. The battles become more intense as the celestial army gathers. These apocalyptic visions depict spiritual conflicts that go beyond our own internal conflicts. They are actual and palpable, and they will take place all over the world as God's angels ascend to confront the principalities and powers that have long dominated human societies. According to the Ethiopian Bible, there will come a time when the forces of good and evil will openly clash not only in the sky but also on the streets, in the corridors of power, and in people's hearts. As the systems of control and deception are exposed and the righteous are called to stand firm against the forces that have enslaved and deceived them, these battles will be characterized by unprecedented upheaval. The ancient war, which calls for action, bravery, and faith, will no longer be a faraway memory, but rather a current reality. The Ethiopian Bible depicts the end times within this apocalyptic framework, when people will have to face the repercussions of their decisions and prepare to fight alongside the heavenly army in the last stand against the forces of evil. The angels will arrive as warriors who stand up for justice, the oppressed, and the restoration of creation, not just as spectators. And the last chapter of the conflict will be written in the ascent of these fighters and the black saints, who command them. The forces of evil will try to maintain their dominance, but the righteous will triumph, stronger and more resolute than ever. The current state of the world is on the verge of undergoing a significant change. The emergence of the angelic army is happening right now and is not a distant event. The conflict is shifting from invisible forces to nations that can be seen, from the spiritual world to the material one. The divine intervention predicted in the Ethiopian Bible will materialize before our very eyes, upending corrupt systems, governments, and institutions. When the righteous stand up to overwhelming darkness, the fight for justice, truth, and spiritual awakening will come to a head. The strength of the black saints, who are closely linked to the divine plan, is made more and more clear as this prophecy develops. With the help of their ancestry and the divine power bestowed upon them, these saints will spearhead the spiritual conflict. For those who have been silenced, forgotten, and oppressed, their anointing will serve as a ray of hope. In addition to the return of divine beings, the rise of the angelic army signifies the rediscovery of humanity's actual purpose: to reclaim the knowledge and power that have been hidden for centuries, to fight for justice, and to remain steadfast in faith. The forces of light will triumph in the last moments of this unfolding prophecy, but not before a bloody and epic battle. Battles that will determine the destiny of all nations will pit the demonic forces against the angelic army and the black saints who command them. It will become evident that the time of reckoning has arrived as the spiritual conflict spreads throughout the world. The righteous will rise to take their place in the heavenly kingdom as the divine plan, as predicted in the Ethiopian Bible's ancient prophecies, comes to pass. Standing in the midst of a prophecy that has been reverberating since the beginning of time, you are not merely witnessing the events of history. You haven't only heard about this conflict between angels and demons in Sunday school stories or old church sermons. It's true. Now is the time. And whether you realize it or not, it's taking place all around you. Even after Lucifer fell, the forces that had been fighting for heaven continued to do so. They relocated to earth. They entered institutions, bloodlines, cultures, ideas, and systems. And they're passing through you right now. Your feelings of bewilderment, rage, fatigue, and desire for something more profound are not coincidental. It has a spiritual component. It's the war trying to enlist you on one side or the other by infiltrating your soul. You're already in it, whether you like it or not. However, you were never intended to observe. You are not a bystander to the tale of good and evil. You serve in the military, an invisible warrior. Every choice you make is a risky move. Every truth you express strikes the darkness with a blow. Love, wisdom, courage, and discipline are your weapons whenever you make that decision. The Ethiopian Bible gives you your assignment in addition to providing a window into the past. It reminds you that you are descended from a divine, ancient, and powerful source. You were never intended to be numb, entertained, and asleep. You were supposed to stand, to combat, to rouse. The first step in preparation is within, not in a church, not in the words of others, but in the inner fire of your soul. Fasting is a war tactic, not just a custom. Prayer is more than a wish list. It's a line of communication with the divine. Truth-seeking is essential for survival, not just for academics, because you are not the only one surrounded by deceit. Your music, news, instruction, and even some of your sermons all contain it. The enemy isn't always armed with fire and horns. Sometimes it comes with a script, a platform, and a smile. You must have discernment if you wish to survive this covert conflict. You must have roots. You must be aware of who you are. Black identity is important in this fight because of this, for the sake of remembering, not pride, because something changes inside of you when you realize that your ancestors were prophets, kings, warriors, and priesthood keepers, not slaves. You quit pleading to be allowed to exist. You no longer seek God in foreign temples. You understand that you are descended from a people who carried the ark, walked with angels, and preserved scrolls that were destroyed by empires. Your DNA contains that same fire. Your spirit is inscribed with that same calling, and that memory is now being called forward by the Most High. Because you will have to decide whether to follow Black Jesus into the fire when he rises, not in the clouds, but in your understanding, mission, and thoughts. The narrative shifts from history to responsibility at this point. You have witnessed the Watchers, the Nephilim, the rebellion, and the fall. Christ was always a warrior, as you have seen. As the world pursued lies, you witnessed Ethiopia's role in upholding the truth. And what happened then is no longer the question. What are you going to do at this moment? Since the war is still ongoing, it has just been moved to your front door, and your soul, your true, eternal self, is waiting for you to answer. If you were moved by this story, if it revealed a memory you were unaware you had, you already know what time it is if something clicked and caused you to sit in silence for a while. Turn on the bell, get ready, and subscribe to the Ethiopian Bible. Since we have only just begun, now the scrolls are open, the lie is unraveling, and they're rising, the real ones. Let me ask you one final question, the kind that keeps your spirit awake until it finds the answer. Which side of the conflict do you think your spirit has been fighting on, and why? Tell me the truth, please. No filters. Don't be afraid, because you and the war are real.